So Stephen Fry the other day absolutely destroyed the idea of religion and God in a clip that went viral. And Russell Brand apparently saw that, and he doesn't agree. He wants to respond to it. He does believe in God. So let's listen, and then we'll come back and break it down.
In a way, what Fry is talking about, in my opinion, is literalism, a literal interpretation of doctrine. In this case, because it's an Irish Catholic interviewer, Gabe Byrne, he's talking about a literal translation of the Gospels. And other than mentioning some phenomena in nature, like burrowing insects and that, talking entirely about human behaviour and human value systems. Now, Joseph Campbell, the cultural mythologist, said all religions are true in that the metaphor is true. So what Campbell's saying there is that religion is an attempt to explain the unknowable, in the same way that science is an attempt to explain the unknowable. Science can explain the mechanics of the universe and can explain the mechanics of biology and anatomy, but can it ever explain the why? The answer is no, it can never explain why this is happening. What we all want to know is there a reason for us being here? And what is the nature of the universe? What is the nature of our consciousness? This is an interesting book called Biocentrism by someone called Robert Lanza. Here he tackles the idea of creation and addresses the flaws, in the same way that Stephen Fry is addressing the flaws in Christian doctrine. Robert Lanza here addresses the flaws in received physics. In the last few decades, there's been considerable discussion of a basic paradox in the construction of the universe as we know it. For example, if the Big Bang had been 1 part in a million more powerful, it would have rushed out too fast for the galaxies and life to develop. If the strong nuclear force were decreased to 2%, atomic nuclei wouldn't hold together, and plain vanilla hydrogen would be the only kind of atom in the universe. If the gravitational force were decreased by just a hair, stars, including the sun, would not ignite. These are 3 of more than 200 physical parameters within the solar system and universe, so exact that it strains credulity to propose that they are random, even if that's exactly what standard contemporary physics baldly suggests. Terence McKenna, a kind of wacky shaman fella, said that the perspective of contemporary science is give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. That free miracle being that the universe sprang into being with these exact rules that are required for life and consciousness to exist. I suppose what Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism are trying to do is make sense of our position, our perspective as awake, conscious, sentient beings within the infinite. For me, as a person who believes in God, my understanding of God is this, that my consciousness emanates from a perspective and it passes through endless filters, the filters of the senses, the subjective filters of the senses and of my own biography. This is good, this is bad, this is wrong, I want that, I don't want that. But behind all of that, there is an awakeness, an awareness that sees it all. And it's in you too, and it's in Stephen Fry, and it's in the man that was interviewing him.
So let's break it down because he has multiple points there. I recommend, by the way, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch the original Stephen Fry clip, and then you'll see exactly what Russell is responding to. But, so first of all, the last point is, well, I view consciousness essentially as God. To which I respond, but Russell, what does that mean exactly? I don't know what that means because that means you're just kind of redefining the word God in a way that you know you're being evasive to what the original conversation was. You know that when you do that New Age definition of God, you're just doing a non sequitur. You're just transitioning over to a different conversation without having the other person in the conversation agree that this is the new standard that we're arguing based off of. And to say that consciousness is God, I mean, okay, so look, science doesn't exactly know yet how or why we have consciousness, but that doesn't mean that you just get to fill in that blank with this broad idea of God. You have to do the hard work and do the studies and do the research and come up with the hypotheses and then see it tested, see if it becomes a theory before you can say, I know the answer, I'll fill that gap with what I want to fill it with. You're just using a more sophisticated version of the God of the gaps argument, which is something that's used by religious people all the time. And when I say religious, I mean more dogmatic religious people. And then, just to go back to the beginning and work our way down here, he says that Stephen Fry was arguing against literalism. He was arguing against fundamentalist religion. Well, that's not true. If you saw the Stephen Fry clip, he was asked a question, what would you say to God if God were real? And then he goes down the list of all these negative things that exist in the world, and if he's omnipotent, right? So that's the only thing that seems to be steady in the conversation and seems to be implied, is that there's a God and the God is omnipotent. Well, then, okay, God, how do you answer for bone cancer in kids and the fact that there are all these horrible things like insects that burrow in your eye and eat your fucking brain or whatever it is he said? How do you accommodate for wildfires and the Ebola virus and malaria and mass poverty and starvation and the earthquake in Haiti and all the... So his argument is, regardless of what particular religion we're talking about, his argument is shitty things exist, and if God is omnipotent and he has control of everything, well then... he's an asshole because the shitty things exist and he's not doing anything to fix them. So he's not arguing just against a literal interpretation. He's arguing against the entire concept of both religion and, in a broader sense, a deistic God. And then Russell says, well, all religions are true because of the metaphor behind it. That's the more nuanced point. So what's the metaphor behind, for example, the fact that women are not allowed to teach men ever about anything, like in the Bible? What's the metaphor behind don't eat pork and don't eat any shellfish whatsoever, like is in the Bible? What's the metaphor behind if you cut your hair, you're going to hell, like is in the Bible? What's the metaphor behind the idea that the earth is flat, which is repeatedly stated in the Bible in different ways, like they talk about the four corners of the earth, to just give one example, but there's other examples of it. What's the metaphor behind a flat earth? What's the metaphor behind a seven-headed dragon? There is no metaphor behind these things. The only argument they have is ignore the parts that are super-de-duper-de-duper crazy, and then the parts that maybe have a nice grain of truth in it, we'll pretend like those matter, and those are the only ones that count. But you can't just disregard the parts that you don't like because they disprove your case. No, the reality is they disprove your case. Religions are not true because of the metaphor behind it, any more than Mother Goose is true because of the metaphor behind it. And then he says, well, the problem with science is that it can't explain the why. Why not? That's a dogmatic claim. The dogmatic claim that, no, science can't explain it, and that's it. I'm making that claim, and that's it. Well, how do you know? What do you mean? What do you mean? Science has uncovered a lot of things that 200 years ago we could have never guessed ever that we could do. If you went back to the year 8 with a laptop or a telephone and you called somebody or you were typing or you had electricity, right? You snapped your finger as you flipped a switch and you turned on a light in the room, people would go, oh, it's magic, witchcraft, kill him, it's sorcery. So just because we don't understand something right now doesn't mean we're never going to understand it. I mean, so why are we here? Well, I would argue one of the reasons is happiness. We all want to be happy, right? Wellness. And science can tell you absolute concrete things about what will make you happy and what won't make you happy. You could hook up fMRIs to the brain and see what, evokes pleasurable responses and the frontal cortex or the amygdala or whatever. There's all these different ways where you can figure these things out. Empiricism is what matters. What matters is what we can prove. I mean, to just write off the idea that, oh, science doesn't apply there. But science isn't just a thing. People talk about it like it's a thing. It's not. It's a process. Science is the process by which you ascertain what is true in the world. So to say that, oh, science can't answer that, it's like saying, well, in that area, we rely too much on the process by which we try to ascertain what is true. How do you do that? You can't do that. How can you rely too much on the process by which you determine truth? You can't do that. All right. Then he says, well, the laws of nature seem perfectly created. He says, oh, look at the physical laws and the Big Bang, and if it was a little bit off in this direction or that direction, well, then everything would have gone to shit, so it couldn't have just been an accident. It couldn't have just been randomness. Now, understand, this is the argument that most moderate religious people or people who are deists believe in, and I'm of the belief that if they just heard the rebuttal to it, which I'm about to give you, that at least half of them would snap out of it and go, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Because that has one giant fallacy in it. So the argument is, well, everything is so perfect. The laws are so perfect, and the creation appears to be a creation, so it must be created. It's so complex, and everything is so perfect that it must be created. Yeah, but, so accepting that logic, whoever created it, if there's a God, which is what Russell Brand believes in, then wouldn't that God have to be, by definition, much more complex? In order to create us, right? You got to be way more complex and way more intricate and way more designed. So who designed the designer? You think you're answering the question by saying it couldn't just be random, there must be a God. You think you're answering the question, but really you're just posing a harder question. That's why it's called the fallacy of passing the buck, because you didn't answer anything. You just made it so that now you have to explain the nature of God and explain how that incredibly intricate, complex being came out of nothing. Because the argument is, oh no, we couldn't, the universe couldn't have come out of nothing at all. That's not possible. It's physically impossible. But God could. So you were using logic, and then you just decided to get out of the realm of logic and say, no, I declare that one doesn't abide by the laws, and even though we do. Don't you understand that you've just passed the question down? That's why they call it the fallacy of passing the buck. All right, next and final here, I'll say his worst point is probably, well, religion just tries to make sense of the unthinkable, and he lists them off. Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, yada yada. He just goes down the list. Well, no, what those religions are, rather clearly, is people from thousands of years ago writing stories down, trying to make sense of the world, but it's obvious in the sense that it's primitive. It's obviously primitive. There are flat-out factual errors that overtly cross into the realm of science there that are wrong, and they don't come anywhere near getting us closer to the unknowable.